G'day, my name's Peter Brennan from Singleton Council. Thank you very much to all three of you. The talks were amazing. I've just got a specific question for Kirstie, and it's just in respect to what you're showing in terms of like the flood attenuation, seeing that the peak was delayed, but as you said, the peak wasn't reduced. However, it's exciting to see it stayed the same, just about. Within the flood, my question is, within the flood inquiry itself, are we seeing those recommendations eking across into floodplain risk management Australia and those sorts of approaches?
A lot of my understanding from the inquiry, so some of the earlier recommendations, 1 through 19, were much more about emergency management and, the role of emergency services in response times and stuff like that. In terms of risk management, it was much more about risk management from a social perspective, so evacuation orders and things like that. In terms of risk management from an environmental perspective, I don't think that was acknowledged as much as it potentially should have been. Some of those environmental effects, I guess we didn't have the data at the time of the inquiry, so some of this data has come out subsequently when we've analysed things like the flood peak travel times and the speed of the flows and stuff like that. That didn't go into those inquiries, but I think we can use those recommendations, build on them, and we can build things like environmental risk assessment into some of those things, which is what we'll continue to do in the next few years as part of the next big project that we're going to look at. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for the question. Thank you, Kirstie. Another question for an individual or the panel collectively here at the front. Get your mic.
Louise Nichols from the Singleton Argus. Should we be encouraging farmers to fence off their riparian area to get that roughness back in, or do we do New Zealand and enforce it? I think in New Zealand it's 10 or 15 metres they've really brought in. So that's your opinion?
Yes.
Right.
The reality of that is obviously challenging, given different land tenures and so on. Sometimes, as you all know, the boundary of a property goes to the centre line of the river channel, sometimes it's to the top of the bank, sometimes it's further away. So the whole idea of buffer widths has been around for a long time. The science and the understanding is in place that that's what we should be doing, but the practical reality of either legislating that or making that a reality is quite challenging, given some of those other historical legacies of things like land tenure and so on. But basically, yes.
If you legislate it and tell people what to do, forget it. It'll never happen. Well, it might, but I don't think it'll work in the Hunter Valley. I think if you just legislate it rather than, and this is another regulation by government onto farmers, it'll be a very tough call for people to do. And when fences get washed away in floods, when you fence a riparian zone, in a big flood you lose a lot of fencing there. How quickly does that get put back up, and on it goes? So you need to be really careful with this to get it right and to keep the landholders on side. Because if you push a landholder around, well, they'll win eventually with freehold land and all the things that goes with that, and the way our political system works. I just think you have to be really careful on making people do things. You have to say, this is why we want to do it. It's our river, it's your river, we have to do it. And they get a narrative there, and even if it takes 20 years and get it done properly, rather than having a big fight over it, it'll never get done. It'll be worse.
Thanks, time for a couple more questions. Bob?
On that note, sorry.
Oh, sorry, missed one.
Sorry, I'm Barb from Nobby's Land Care. On that note, is there any tax incentives for landholders? Anything that we can dangle the carrot instead of trying to, legislate and pour more rules in to reward them for this kind of stuff? Is there anything, anything in that area?
Well, I'm sure that's where we need government action in that area, and also go back to the carbon sequestration. Like, really, do a budget on that, do your accounting on that to see what that tells you, and work that way. But at the moment, there's not a lot of tax incentives, but they're the things we should be working on through the political system, rather than just bringing a law and say do it. That's where my thinking is. But anyway, time will tell, I suppose.
Bob Doyle. I agree with Kirstie that the riverbanks should be fenced off, but equally I agree with Cameron, you can't go and tell people, and you won't be able to tell landholders to do it. And I've been saying this for a long time, there is a disconnect between how you manage your riparian zone and how you manage your whole farm. If you look at your riparian zone as a component of your whole farm, you can make a profit out of fencing off your riparian zone, and it increases farm productivity. You talk about whole farm productivity, not necessarily just productivity on every hectare of the farm. You look at the cumulative gain you can get. It's a profitable exercise, and I feel that the offering of grants, the continual offering of grants about riparian zone sends the wrong signal, because it implies there is no economic benefit. There is an economic benefit, and the net outcome is all of the environmental positive benefits that people are trying to achieve as well.
Bob, I think I just heard you volunteer to present a case study at the next Hunter River Forum exactly on that. That would be a great thing. Thank you. Another question? One here, Liz. Sorry, we'll go to the one on the left and then to Liz.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mick
Just-
through. Sorry. Yep, Mick through gate. Just a question for Scott. In the time difference that you've done your second trip, we do a lot of work on the river up there in the Upper Hunter, Beltrees through to Musbrook, particularly in fish habitat and aquatic life. I just wondered anecdotally, in your difference in time, you saw any improvement or any difference in the habitat in the water?
Yes and no. The carp is still prevalent. I was stunned to see how much the quantities of carp, the numbers of carp still in the river, in the upper reaches. But there was also, I did see native fish as well, and I wondered, and I think you were involved with this, Kirstie, some of the engineered log jams that in part were designed to rough up the river, but also to give a better chance to native fishes and native fish species for habitat. So in that part of a bit further down, I thought, well, it looks as though that has had some success. Higher up, the river looks unchanged in that it looked healthy. It was nice to see more water in it this time, obviously particularly downstream from Glenbourne. But the carp still seems to be something that is tormenting and ravaging the system. And as I say, I was surprised that hadn't changed in a decade, given how much money, how much effort, how many projects have been directed towards it.
Thanks, Scott. And we did actually contemplate putting a fisheries presentation in, but I think we'll mark that one as a next time around. There's obviously a lot of interest around fish, both as an indicator and just for leisure and enjoyment. I think we'll make Liz our last one, and then we better get everyone a stretch and a break.
Oh, thanks. Congratulations, Kirstie, on your Australian Research Council grant. Can you just expand a little bit about what the grant is for and what you're hoping to achieve in regards to your methodology, etc.?
Sure, I'll try and sum it up. So what we're going to be looking at is different scales of practical implementations that could be implemented up and down the coast. So Hunter LLS is one partner, North Coast, South East and New South Wales DPE. It's one of the larger grants that was awarded in this round, thank goodness. So we're going to be considering how much roughness is needed in river channels at the reach scale to get some sort of flood mitigation signal, whether it's even just at minor flow levels. Then we're going to start to consider where we might have these floodplains as assets, so looking at where within river valleys we might have potential for water storage detention basins, for want of a better term, so better utilising those floodplains as water storage features during large floods. And then we're going to do some scenario modelling at the catchment scale, because the big picture natural flood management internationally is about desynchronising flood peaks in catchments. Now that's a massive challenge, right, because that requires catchment scale interventions. So we're going to do some modelling at that scale and put in some climate change scenarios, thinking about how floods are going to change in the future. And we're going to run some scenarios where you're going to get best bang for your buck in terms of implementing some of these roughness interventions at the local scale, at the reach scale, and then at the catchment scale to see some of those flood mitigation impacts. That's it in a nutshell, but it's a linkage grant, so that means that it will have very, very practical outcomes. It's not just going to be a bunch of science. There'll be science that'll all set in the foundation, but we're hopefully going to produce things like catchment scale maps about where you're going to get best bang for your buck by investing in re-roughing your rivers, getting the fibre back into those river systems. So we'll see how that goes.
Thanks, Kirstie. Could you please join me in thanking the panel?